Welcome to Sleepy Anime Stories. When we last left our story, Team 7 had just passed the first stage of the Chunin Exams. Through a combination of cleverness, luck, and sheer determination, Naruto hadn't answered a single question on that written test. Yet he and his teammates advanced alongside dozens of other Chunin teams from villages across the shinobi world. But that first exam was merely a test of resolve, a way to weed out those who lacked the courage to face the unknown. What came next would test something far more fundamental, the will to survive when death itself stalks you through the darkness. Let's dive into one of the most pivotal arcs in all of Naruto, where the stakes escalate from friendly competition to mortal peril, where legends emerge from the shadows, and where the bonds between teammates are forged in the crucible of genuine terror. The 44th training ground earned its name honestly. Known throughout Konoha as the Forest of Death, this massive tract of wilderness sprawled across 10 kilometers in every direction from a central tower. 44 gates ringed its perimeter, each one a threshold between the relative safety of the village and something far more primal and dangerous. The forest itself seemed to pulse with menace, its dense canopy blocking out the sun and casting everything beneath in an unsettling twilight gloom. Ancient trees towered overhead, their massive trunks thick enough that it would take several people linking hands to encircle them, their branches creating a maze of shadows and concealment where anything could be hiding. But the darkness wasn't the most dangerous thing about this place. The Forest of Death earned its reputation through its inhabitants, creatures that had grown massive and aggressive in this protected, isolated ecosystem. Giant leeches the size of dogs lurked in murky streams, their lamprey mouths capable of draining a grown man's blood in minutes. Tigers prowled through the undergrowth, their teeth and claws honed by generations of hunting in this competitive environment. Bears stood 3 meters tall when they reared up, territorial and aggressive, viewing any intruder as either prey or threat. Massive snakes slithered through the branches overhead, pythons thick as tree trunks that could swallow a person whole. Poisonous plants grew in profusion, their beautiful flowers hiding toxic thorns or contact poisons that could paralyze or kill. Every shadow might conceal a predator. Every rustling leaf might signal danger. This was nature at its most brutal and unforgiving. And into this nightmare ecosystem, Konoha was about to send dozens of 12 and 13-year-old children. Anko Mitarashi stood before the assembled genin teams at the forest's edge, her wild purple hair and fishnet armor giving her an almost feral appearance that matched the wilderness behind her. As the proctor for the second stage of the Chunin Exams, she seemed perfectly suited to the environment, her sharp eyes scanning the nervous faces before her with a predator's assessment. Some of the genin were trying to look confident, puffing out their chests and affecting bravado. Others couldn't hide their fear, their eyes wide as they stared at the dark forest stretching away behind her. A few, like Gaara of the Sand, seemed utterly indifferent, their expressions blank masks that revealed nothing of what they might be thinking or feeling. Before any team could enter the forest, they had to sign a waiver. Anko made this very clear, her voice carrying a dark amusement as she explained that the village and its proctors would not be held responsible for any deaths that occurred during this exam. Deaths. Not injuries. Deaths. The casual way she spoke about it made several genin pale, the reality of what they were facing suddenly very real. This wasn't a training exercise. This wasn't a simulation. People could die in there, and everyone would just accept it as part of the exam process. The waiver wasn't just a formality, it was a grim acknowledgement that some of the people standing here might not come back out. The rules for this stage seemed simple enough on the surface, but their implications were chilling. Each team would be given a scroll at random, either a heaven scroll or an earth scroll. The objective was to make it to the tower at the forest's center within 5 days, bringing both a heaven scroll and an earth scroll with you. Since you only started with one type, that meant you had to take the other from another team, and therein lay the test's true nature. This wasn't about survival skills or navigation, or even combat ability in isolation. This was about being willing to hunt other human beings, to track them down and take what they had, by force if necessary. Some teams would form alliances, working together to improve their odds. Others would set ambushes, finding choke points or likely paths and lying in wait for victims. The more aggressive teams would actively hunt, tracking other Chunin through the forest like the predators that called it home. And everyone would have to do all of this while also avoiding the forest's natural dangers, while rationing whatever supplies they'd brought, while fighting exhaustion and hunger and fear. 5 days in this nightmare, knowing that every other team out there was a potential enemy, knowing that at any moment you might be attacked, knowing that death could come from any direction at any time. Anko's grin widened as she finished explaining the rules. She was clearly looking forward to this, anticipating the chaos and carnage that was about to unfold. Before dismissing the teams, she added one more crucial piece of information. Once you had both scrolls, do not open them until you reach the tower. The scrolls themselves were sealed with a jutsu, and opening them prematurely would have consequences. She didn't elaborate on what those consequences might be, but the warning was clear enough. This test had layers, secrets within secrets, and following the rules to the letter was just as important as having the skill to survive. The gates opened, and the Chunin flooded into the forest of death. Team 7 moved cautiously through the darkened woods, their formation tight and alert. Sasuke took point with his Sharingan active. Those red eyes tracking every shadow and movement. Sakura stayed in the middle, the earth scroll they'd been given secured safely in her pouch, her head swiveling as she tried to watch every direction at once. Naruto brought up the rear, his boisterous confidence from earlier replaced by a more focused determination. Even he could sense the oppressive atmosphere of this place, the way it seemed to press down on you, making every breath feel heavier, every sound seem louder. They had barely made it a kilometer into the forest when Naruto announced he needed to relieve himself, disappearing into the bushes despite Sakura's protests about staying together. When he returned moments later, something was wrong. Sasuke noticed it immediately, his Sharingan picking up subtle discrepancies in the way this Naruto moved and spoke. Without warning, Sasuke hurled a kunai directly at Naruto's leg, the blade stabbing through his thigh and pinning him against a tree. Both Sakura and the impaled Naruto screamed, one in horror at what Sasuke had done, the other in pain and shock. But Sasuke's expression remained cold and analytical as he pointed out what he'd noticed. This Naruto was right-handed, while the real Naruto was left-handed. A small detail, the kind of thing most people wouldn't notice, but to someone with the Sharingan's ability to perceive and process minute details, it was as glaring as a spotlight. A moment later, the fake Naruto transformed in a puff of smoke, revealing a Rain Village Chunin who'd been trying to infiltrate their group, probably hoping to get close enough to steal their scroll before they realized what was happening. It was a brilliant strategy that had nearly worked, and it highlighted just how paranoid you had to be in this environment. The enemy wasn't just the forest and its creatures. It was everyone around you, anyone who might want what you had. Trust became a luxury you couldn't afford, except with your own teammates. And even then, you had to constantly verify that your teammates were actually your teammates and not someone wearing their face. The real Naruto returned moments later, confused by the tension in the air and the injured enemy Nin groaning against the tree. After Sasuke explained what had happened, Naruto suggested they verify each other's identities with a password, something personal that only they would know. It was a smart precaution, and they quickly established one, a small measure of security, in an insecure world. But they had barely finished setting up their verification system when the temperature seemed to drop, the oppressive atmosphere of the forest suddenly becoming something far more sinister. A wind kicked up from nowhere, unnatural and cold, and with it came a presence that made all three genin freeze in their tracks. This wasn't like the danger they'd sensed from the forest's creatures. This was something else entirely, something that made their instincts scream at them to run, to hide, to get as far away as possible. It felt like being watched by something so far beyond their level that they were nothing but insects to it. And then she appeared. The grass ninja named Shiore stepped into view, her movements fluid and predatory. There was something wrong about her, something that made Sakura's skin crawl and set Sasuke's Sharingan spinning as he tried to analyze the threat. But it was the woman's face that truly terrified them. Her expression held no emotion at all, just a cold interest as she looked them over like a scientist, examining specimens in a lab. When she smiled, it was all wrong, too wide, too knowing, more like a snake baring its fangs than any human expression. "What cute little Janin," she said, her voice carrying a quality that made it feel like ice water trickling down their spines. "You seem to have something I want." The killing intent hit them like a physical blow. Sasuke and Sakura both froze completely, their bodies locking up as their minds were suddenly flooded with visions of their own deaths. Not vague premonitions or imagined scenarios, but vivid, crystal clear images of how they would die, each death more gruesome than the last, stabbed through the throat, bisected at the waist, their bones crushed to powder, their skin melted off by acid, their organs pulled out while they were still alive to watch on and on, hundreds of possible deaths flashing through their minds in an instant, each one feeling absolutely real, absolutely certain. This was the product of a lifetime of killing, the accumulated weight of thousands of deaths channeled into pure malicious intent and projected at them like a weapon. Sakura couldn't even scream, her voice frozen in her throat, tears streaming down her face as her mind buckled under the assault. Sasuke fared little better, his Sharingan actually working against him as it processed every detail of every death with perfect clarity. His hand moved toward his kunai pouch, shaking so badly that he couldn't grasp a weapon. Part of his mind, the part still capable of thought, was screaming at him to move, to fight, to do something, but his body wouldn't respond. Terror had locked him in place as effectively as any paralysis jutsu. This was the difference between a true ninja, one who had survived countless missions and killed countless enemies, and children playing at being warriors. Zabuza's killing intent back in the land of waves had been frightening, but it was nothing compared to this. Zabuza had been a skilled assassin, but this person, whoever they really were, operated on a completely different level. This was someone who had perfected the art of killing, who had refined it to such a degree that even the intent to kill could be used as a weapon. Sasuke found his hand moving to his kunai, not to fight, but to do something he'd never imagined doing, taking his own life. In that moment, with his mind overwhelmed by the visions of death, suicide seemed like a mercy, a way to have some control over how he died rather than waiting for this monster to kill him in whatever horrible way it chose. The blade was at his thigh, ready to drive in, when something orange and loud shattered through the nightmare of fear. "Get away from my teammates." Naruto's fist connected with the grass ninja's face, with all the force his terror converted to rage could muster. The blow actually moved the woman's head, and more importantly, it broke the spell of killing intent that had frozen his friends. Naruto stood between them and the threat, his body shaking, but his stance firm, his blue eyes blazing with determination, despite the fear he had to be feeling. Unlike Sasuke and Sakura, Naruto hadn't been directly in the line of that killing intent, approaching from the side, and while he'd felt its effects, he hadn't been paralyzed by it. Or perhaps, given everything he'd survived in his life, his tolerance for fear was just higher. Either way, his intervention gave Sasuke and Sakura the moment they needed to recover, to remember how to breathe, how to think, how to function. The grass ninja's smile widened as she looked at Naruto. "Interesting," she said, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice now. The dead last of the class, showing more courage than the genius. How delightful. What happened next defied everything they'd been taught about tactical retreats and knowing when you were outmatched. A massive snake erupted from the ground beneath Naruto, its jaws wide enough to swallow him whole. But instead of running or dodging, Naruto summoned a dozen shadow clones, all of them working together in ways he'd never managed before, their coordination driven by desperation. They grabbed the snake's mouth, forcing its jaws wider, while Naruto used the momentum to leap into the beast's throat, his clones following to support him. The snake's stomach was meant to be a death trap, a place where prey would be crushed and digested, but Naruto had filled it so completely with shadow clones that the snake's own body worked against it, unable to compress around the mass of identical bodies packed inside it. The pressure built until the snake exploded from within, and Naruto emerged covered in viscera but unbroken, his grin manic and fierce. Sasuke watched this display with an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time and barely recognized. Shame. He was supposed to be the elite, the genius, the last survivor of the legendary Uchiha clan. But when real danger had appeared, he'd frozen. Worse than frozen. He'd been about to kill himself rather than face the threat. And it was Naruto, the class dunce, the fool who couldn't even perform a basic clone technique until a few months ago, who had saved him. The shame curdled into something darker, something that would fester and grow in the days and weeks to come. The grass ninja's eyes gleamed with approval as she watched Naruto. "Yes," she said softly. "You'll do nicely." Then she moved, faster than any of them could track. And suddenly she was right in front of Sasuke, her hand reaching out to cup his face almost gently. "But this one has such potential. The Uchiha bloodline, that magnificent Sharingan. Yes, you're the one I've been waiting for." Before Sasuke could react, before anyone could do anything, the woman's neck extended like a snake's, impossibly long, her mouth opening wider than any human jaw should to reveal elongated fangs. She bit down on Sasuke's neck at the junction of his shoulder, and the Uchiha heir screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed through the forest, where her teeth punctured his flesh. Something dark and terrible spread, black marks racing across his skin like living ink, forming a pattern of 3 tomo in a circle. The pain was like nothing Sasuke had ever experienced, like fire and ice and electricity all at once. Like his very blood was being rewritten at the molecular level. His vision went white, then red, then black, and he collapsed, unconscious before he hit the ground. Naruto lunged forward, but the woman's hand shot out, faster than he could see, and tapped his stomach with one finger. Immediately, Naruto felt his chakra go haywire, the normally smooth flow becoming turbulent and chaotic. He tried to form hand seals, but couldn't focus his chakra properly. It slipped through his mental grasp like water through a sieve. The woman had done something to his seal, to the very thing that contained the 9 tails, and the disruption was crippling. He fell to his knees, clutching his stomach, his face twisted in confusion and fear. "That seal on your belly," the woman said conversationally, as if she hadn't just incapacitated 2 genin in seconds. "It was interfering with my plans." The 5-element seal. "I've placed on top of it will keep your little fox's power locked away for now. Don't worry, it's not permanent, and you're talented enough that you'll find someone to remove it eventually." She turned her attention to the terrified Sakura, and for a moment, The pink-haired girl was absolutely certain she was going to die. But instead of attacking, the grass ninja simply smiled at her, a smile that was somehow more terrifying than any killing intent. Take care of your teammates, little Kunoichi, especially the Uchiha boy. He's going to need you in the days ahead. That mark I've given him, it will test him, tempt him, try to consume him. But if he can master it, if he can control the power it offers, well, her smile widened. Let's just say, I'll be very interested to see how he develops. And then she was gone, vanishing into the shadows as if she'd never been there at all, leaving Sakura alone with her unconscious teammates in the middle of the most dangerous forest in the world, with both of them seriously injured and 4.5 days still remaining in the exam. Sakura had never felt more helpless in her entire life. To understand what had just been done to Sasuke, we need to delve into some of the darkest research ever conducted in the shinobi world. Work that pushed beyond the boundaries of ethical experimentation into territory that most would consider monstrous. The mark that now adorned Sasuke's neck, slowly spreading across his skin like living corruption, was the product of decades of obsessive study, countless failed experiments, and a brilliance twisted towards selfish ends. The story begins with a man named Jugo, a member of a small clan whose members possessed an extraordinary and terrible gift. They could absorb natural energy directly from the world around them, drawing in what would later be codified as Senjutsu chakra, the power of the natural world itself. But unlike the carefully controlled sage mode techniques practiced by places like Mount Myoboku, Jugo's clan couldn't regulate this absorption. Natural energy flowed into them constantly, building up in their bodies, and when it reached critical levels, they underwent violent transformations, their bodies warping and changing, growing additional limbs or weapons of bone and flesh, their minds consumed by bloodlust and rage. Jugo himself was a gentle soul who feared his own transformations, knowing that when the change took him, he became a berserker who killed indiscriminately. Unable to distinguish friend from foe, he sought help wherever he could find it, desperate for some way to control or eliminate his curse. And eventually, his search led him to one of the most brilliant and morally bankrupt scientists the shinobi world had ever produced, Orochimaru of the legendary Sannin. Orochimaru had been obsessed with the nature of life and death ever since he'd watched his parents die during the Second Shinobi War. That loss had broken something fundamental in him, replacing his humanity with an insatiable hunger to understand how life worked at its most basic level, how it could be extended, how death could be defeated. Where other ninjas saw jutsu as tools to accomplish missions, Orochimaru saw them as keys to unlocking the secrets of existence itself. He experimented on prisoners, on his own subordinates, on anyone he could get his hands on, refining his techniques through trial and error, treating human lives as nothing more than data points in his research. When Jugo came to him seeking help, Orochimaru saw an opportunity. Here was a living example of the human body being modified by natural energy, a template he could study and potentially replicate. Rather than trying to cure Jugo, Orochimaru instead studied him exhaustively, taking samples of his blood, his tissue, his secretions, analyzing the special enzymes Jugo's body produced that allowed him to absorb and process natural energy. And then Orochimaru began experimenting with ways to transfer Jugo's abilities to others. The process was horrifically simple in concept and devastatingly complex in execution. Orochimaru would isolate the specific enzymes from Jugo's body that enabled the absorption and transformation, then mix them with his own Senjutsu chakra to create a substrate that could be implanted into another person. The implantation method was equally straightforward. Orochimaru would bite the target, using his fangs to puncture the skin and inject the enzyme mixture directly into their bloodstream. From there, the enzymes would spread through the victim's body, binding to their cells, rewriting their biology at a fundamental level to grant them access to a fraction of Jugo's power. The survival rate was abysmal. Out of every 10 people Orochimaru subjected to this process, 9 died. Sometimes, the rejection was immediate, their bodies breaking down within hours as their immune systems went into overdrive, trying to fight the foreign enzymes, essentially causing them to die from the equivalent of an allergic reaction that affected every cell simultaneously. Other times, the transformation was too much for them to handle, their bodies mutating uncontrollably until they were barely recognizable as human anymore. All higher brain function destroyed as they devolved into mindless beasts. A few went insane from the sudden influx of new sensations and abilities, their minds unable to cope with the changes. But that 1 in 10 who survived, who adapted to the curse mark successfully, gained something extraordinary. They could activate the mark at will, channeling its power to enhance their physical abilities dramatically. Their strength increased, their speed improved, their chakra reserves expanded, and they gained access to the transformative abilities that Jugo's clan possessed, allowing them to morph their bodies into combat forms. The mark had 2 stages of activation, each one more powerful and more dangerous than the last. The first stage manifested as the mark spreading across the user's skin in patterns that varied depending on the specific curse seal design. For the cursed seal of heaven that Sasuke now bore, this meant flame-like tendrils of black spreading from the 3 tomo pattern at his neck, racing across half his body in winding organic patterns. In this stage, the user's chakra was amplified significantly, perhaps doubling their normal capacity, and their physical abilities were enhanced proportionally. They became faster, stronger, more durable, though the strain on their body was considerable, and prolonged use would leave them exhausted. The second stage represented a complete transformation, the user's body warping into a form that reflected the specific nature of their curse mark. When Sasuke would eventually unlock this stage, his skin would turn grey, his hair would grow long and change colour, and most dramatically, large hand-shaped wings would sprout from his back, allowing him to fly. His eyes would shift to a dark grey colour, the star-shaped pattern that appeared across his face, giving him an almost demonic appearance. In this form, the power boost was enormous, multiplying the user's abilities to the point where they could fight opponents far above their normal weight class. But the cost was equally steep. The curse mark would begin to corrode the user's mind and soul, eating away at their sense of self, their morals, their humanity. Use it too long or too often, and you risked losing yourself entirely, becoming nothing but a puppet of the mark's influence. And that influence wasn't random or abstract. Every curse mark contained a fragment of Orochimaru himself, a piece of his chakra, and consciousness embedded in the seal. This served multiple purposes. First, it gave Orochimaru a connection to everyone who bore his mark, allowing him to sense them, to influence them, to corrupt them slowly toward his way of thinking. Second, it acted as a form of insurance for his immortality experiments. If Orochimaru's current body was ever destroyed, he could potentially resurrect himself through the curse marks, using them as anchor points to pull himself back from death. Third, and perhaps most insidiously, the marks could be used to control their bearers if Orochimaru chose to activate them forcefully, overriding the user's will and compelling them to obey his commands. Orochimaru created several different designs of curse marks over the years, each one slightly different in its effects and the transformations it granted. The Cursed Seal of Heaven and the Cursed Seal of Earth were considered his masterpieces, the most powerful and stable of his designs. The Heaven Seal was better suited for those with strong spiritual energy, granting transformations that were more elegant and flight capable. The Earth Seal worked better with those who had powerful physical energy, producing bulkier, more powerful transformations. But there were others as well, the various marks given to his Sound 4 elite guards, each one tailored to complement their existing abilities. Experimental marks that he tested on various subjects with mixed results. Failed prototypes that either killed their bearers or drove them insane. The implications of this technology were staggering. Orochimaru had essentially found a way to grant ordinary ninjas access to Sage Mode level power without requiring them to undergo the years of training that true Sage Mode demanded. It was a shortcut to power, instant gratification for those willing to accept the risks and the corruption that came with it. And for someone like Sasuke, someone already consumed by hatred and the need for revenge, someone whose moral compass had been shattered by trauma and grief, the temptation of that power would be almost impossible to resist. Orochimaru knew all of this when he marked Sasuke. He wasn't just giving the Uchiha heir a power boost. He was planting a seed of corruption that would grow and fester, slowly pulling Sasuke away from his friends, from his village, from everything that might have anchored him to the light. The curse mark would whisper to Sasuke in moments of frustration, promising him the power he needed to kill Itachi. If only he would embrace it fully, it would erode his connections to others, making him more isolated, more willing to walk dark paths if it meant achieving his goals. And eventually, when Sasuke was ready, when he was desperate enough, it would draw him directly to Orochimaru, delivering to the Sannin the perfect vessel for his next body transfer. The curse mark wasn't just a weapon or a tool, it was a trap, a carefully constructed snare designed to capture the most promising young ninja of the generation and deliver him into Orochimaru's hands. And Sasuke had just been caught in it, completely unaware of the chains that were even now beginning to wind around his soul. Back in the Forest of Death, Sasuke lay unconscious, his body fighting against the foreign elements invading his system, the curse mark spreading and receding across his skin as his natural vitality battled against Orochimaru's seal. Fever burned through him, his temperature spiking as his immune system went into overdrive. And in his delirium, he dreamed of power, of Itachi, of revenge dripping with blood and fire. The hours that followed Orochimaru's attack would prove to be the most important in Sakura's development as a ninja. Not because of any technique she learned or power she gained, but because of the stark, terrifying reality that slapped her in the face and forced her to look at herself honestly for the first time in her life. She dragged both Sasuke and Naruto to a small cave, struggling under their combined weight, her arms shaking with exhaustion. They'd found a relatively defensible position, a hollow in an ancient tree's roots that was partially concealed by undergrowth, and she'd laid them as comfortably as she could, checking Naruto's pulse, feeling Sasuke's fever, doing everything she could think of, but knowing it wasn't enough. She wasn't a medical ninja. She barely knew basic first aid beyond what every genin learned at the academy, and both of her teammates needed help that she couldn't provide. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the crushing realization of how useless she'd been during the actual fight. While Naruto had fought, and Sasuke had tried to overcome his fear, what had she done? Frozen, stood there paralyzed by terror, unable to move, unable to help, unable to do anything but watch. She was supposed to be a ninja, a warrior capable of protecting herself and others. But when it really mattered, when her teammates needed her, she'd been nothing but dead weight. All those hours at the academy, perfecting her chakra control and memorizing theory, all that time spent styling her hair and trying to impress Sasuke and competing with Ino over a boy instead of taking her training seriously, what had it amounted to? In the moment of crisis, all of her perfect textbook knowledge meant nothing. She couldn't fight, she couldn't heal, she couldn't protect. She could only cower and cry and wait for someone else to save her. The shame of it burned worse than any physical wound. She'd always defined herself through other people, as smarter than Naruto, as Sasuke's admirer, as Ino's rival. But she'd never really thought about who Sakura was as a ninja in her own right, what she brought to the team beyond being able to answer questions correctly. And now, sitting in this cave with her unconscious teammates, the answer seemed painfully clear. Nothing. She brought nothing. She was the weak link, the liability that held the others back. As if the universe wanted to underscore this lesson, 3 ninja suddenly appeared at the cave entrance. They were from the Hidden Sound Village, this newly formed village that most hadn't even heard of until these exams, and they wore the headbands with pride, confident in their abilities. The leader was a boy named Dosu, his entire face wrapped in bandages except for one eye, a strange device covering his right arm that looked like it might be some kind of weapon. With him were his teammates, Zaku, a spiky-haired boy with an arrogant smirk, and Kin, a dark-haired girl whose expression was calculating and cold. Well, Dosu said, his voice muffled slightly by the bandages, but carrying an unpleasant amusement. Looks like we've found the Uchiha, and his little friends Orochimaru-sama told us you might be indisposed. How convenient for us. Sakura's mind raced. She could tell from their postures, from the way they moved, that these were experienced fighters. They weren't academy students playing at being ninja. They'd clearly seen real combat, killed real people. Against the 3 of them, with both her teammates out of commission, she had no chance. None. They could kill all 3 of them, take their scroll, and continue the exam without breaking a sweat. But running wasn't an option. Moving Sasuke and Naruto again would take time she didn't have, and they couldn't defend themselves. If she ran for help, they'd be dead before she got back, which meant there was only one choice left. No matter how hopeless it was, she had to fight. Not because she thought she could win, but because there was literally nothing else she could do. "You'll have to go through me first," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, despite the terror freezing her veins. The sound ninja laughed. It wasn't even mocking laughter. It was genuine amusement, the way you might laugh at a kitten trying to fight a tiger. They didn't see her as a threat. They saw her as a minor inconvenience at worst, something to be brushed aside on their way to their real target. The fight that followed was brutal and one-sided. Sakura had learned the basics of taijutsu at the academy, but that was designed for sparring with other students, not real combat against killers. She lasted perhaps 30 seconds before Kin had her pinned, her fingers tangled painfully in Sakura's long pink hair, yanking her head back at an agonizing angle. Kin's other hand held a kunai, the blade resting against Sakura's throat, just barely not cutting skin, the message clear. One wrong move, and you're dead. "Such pretty hair," Kin cooed mockingly. "You've clearly spent a lot of time on it. Is that what you've been doing while your teammates were training? Playing beauty salon? And they say kunoichi from Konoha are supposed to be something special. What a joke." That's when it hit Sakura, really hit her, how absurd she'd been. Her hair. She'd kept it long specifically because she'd heard once that Sasuke liked girls with long hair. She'd spent hours brushing it, styling it, keeping it perfect, all to impress a boy who barely acknowledged her existence. Meanwhile, Naruto had been training his body, pushing himself to exhaustion every day, and Sasuke had been honing his skills relentlessly, driven by his need for revenge. And what had she been doing? Obsessing over her appearance, competing with Ino over nothing, defining herself entirely through her relationships with others, rather than developing herself as a person or a ninja. Inner Sakura, that voice of her repressed feelings and honest emotions, suddenly spoke up with unusual clarity. "What's more important, Sakura? Your hair or your teammates' lives? The answer was obvious. It had always been obvious. She'd just been too shallow to see it. When Kin yanked her head back again, probably preparing to mock her some more, Sakura did something completely unexpected. She grabbed her own hair, pulled out a kunai with her other hand, and sliced through the thick, pink strands, cutting herself free. The sudden release of tension made Kin stumble backward, surprised, and gave Sakura just enough of an opening to spin and kick the other girl away. The weight of her hair was gone, the long locks she'd maintained for years lying scattered on the ground, and Sakura felt lighter, not just physically, but emotionally. That hair had represented all the shallow, superficial parts of herself, all the time she'd wasted on stupid things, while her teammates were getting stronger. Cutting, it felt like cutting away those parts of her, leaving room for something better to grow. She was still hopelessly outmatched against 3 experienced fighters. Cutting her hair hadn't magically made her stronger or more skilled, but something had changed in her mindset. She was no longer fighting because she had no choice. She was fighting because she chose to, because protecting her teammates mattered more than anything, including her own life. If she died here, at least she'd die as an actual ninja rather than a girl playing dress-up. The sound ninja came at her from all sides. She managed to land a few hits, her academy training giving her enough basics to at least make them work for it. But in the end, skill and experience won out. Zaku's sound-based jutsu hammered into her, the sonic waves feeling like fists pounding her entire body at once. Kin's genjutsu had her seeing double, her equilibrium shot, unable to tell which direction was up. Dosu's melody arm, that strange device he wore, resonated at a frequency that made her inner ear feel like it was being scrambled, nausea washing over her in waves. She hit the ground hard, tasting blood, her vision swimming. The sound ninja stood over her, and Dosu raised his arm, ready to deliver a killing blow. This was it. She was going to die. And the worst part was knowing that after they killed her, they'd kill Sasuke and Naruto too. All 3 of them erased from existence because she hadn't been strong enough to protect them. A green blur slammed into Dosu from the side, the impact sending the sound ninja flying. Sakura blinked, trying to clear her vision, and saw Rock Lee standing protectively in front of her, his bowl-cut hair and bushy eyebrows instantly recognizable. His nice guy pose somehow less ridiculous than it had seemed when she'd seen him before. Here, in this desperate situation, his arrival felt like a miracle. "Fear not, Sakura-chan," Lee declared, giving her his signature thumbs up, despite the fact that he was about to face 3 dangerous opponents alone. "I won't let them hurt you or your teammates. A beautiful flower of Konoha should never have to face such trials alone." Under normal circumstances, Sakura might have been embarrassed or annoyed by Lee's over-the-top declaration. But right now, with death literally seconds away, she'd never been so happy to see anyone in her entire life. Lee was weird, yes, and his romantic declarations were uncomfortable, but he was also incredibly strong, one of the best taijutsu specialists among the genin. And most importantly, he was here, willing to help them, despite having no obligation to do so. The fight between Lee and the sound ninja was brief but intense. Lee was a specialist in taijutsu, to the point where he couldn't use ninjutsu or genjutsu at all, but his physical skills more than made up for those deficiencies. He moved faster than the sound ninja could track, his strikes landing with devastating force, and even Dosu's melody arm couldn't keep up with the sheer speed of Lee's attacks. The sound ninja quickly realized they were outmatched and began to retreat, but not before Lee had made it clear that if they came back, he wouldn't hold back the next time. But Lee's intervention wasn't enough to save the day. Just as the sound ninja were regrouping for another attack, a different voice rang out through the clearing, one that made even Lee stop and turn. "Troublesome," Shikamaru Nara drawled, emerging from the shadows with his teammates Ino and Choji flanking him. Team 10 had arrived, drawn by the sounds of combat, and while they might not be as individually powerful as some of the other teams, 3 more genin shifted the odds considerably. Looks like we got here just in time. Though honestly, I'd rather be napping right now. But even with Lee and Team 10 there, the situation remained tense. The Sound Ninja was skilled and clearly prepared to fight to the death if necessary. Blood would be spilled before this was over, possibly a lot of it, and there was no guarantee who would walk away. And then everything changed. A pulse of dark, malevolent chakra washed over the clearing like a wave of pure hatred, so intense that it made everyone freeze, the raw power of it stunning friend and foe alike. Sakura turned to see Sasuke standing at the cave entrance, but this wasn't the Sasuke she knew. His curse mark had spread across half his body, the black flames of its pattern covering his left side completely, and his eyes, though they still held the 3 tomoe of his Sharingan, seemed darker, more feral. His expression was twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite a snarl, his lips pulled back to show his teeth. "You hurt my teammates," Sasuke said, and his voice carried a quality that made the temperature feel like it had dropped several degrees. "You tried to kill them. You thought you could just come here and do whatever you wanted without consequences." He moved, and the speed was shocking. One moment he was at the cave entrance, the next he was on Zaku, the movement so fast that most of the people there couldn't even track it. Sasuke grabbed the Sound Ninja's arms and, with a sickening crack that made several people flinch, broke them both, pulling them backward at angles arms weren't supposed to bend. Zaku's screams echoed through the forest, raw and agonized, and Sasuke's expression didn't change at all. If anything, he looked satisfied. This wasn't combat. This wasn't even a fight. This was cruelty, pure and simple. Sasuke taking pleasure in another person's pain, and it terrified everyone watching, friend and foe alike. This wasn't the cool, composed Sasuke who fought with precision and efficiency. This was something darker, something twisted, the curse mark bringing out the worst parts of his nature and amplifying them until they consumed everything else. The remaining Sound Ninja grabbed their screaming teammate and fled, not even bothering to try and take the scroll anymore. Survival was more important than completing their mission, especially when facing someone who seemed perfectly willing to torture them to death. As they vanished into the forest, the dark chakra around Sasuke faded, the curse mark receding back to its original form, just the 3 tomoe pattern at his neck. He swayed on his feet, exhaustion hitting him like a hammer, and collapsed. Sakura caught him before he hit the ground, cradling his head in her lap, tears streaming down her face, tears of relief that they'd survived, tears of horror at what she'd just witnessed, tears of confusion about what was happening to Sasuke, what that mark was doing to him. Team 10 left shortly after, not wanting to stick around in case more threats appeared, though Ino did pause long enough to compliment Sakura on her new haircut. An olive branch extended between former rivals Lee remained a bit longer, making sure they were secure before departing with promises that if they needed help during the rest of the exam, they only had to call for him. And then it was just Team 7 again, alone in the forest with 3.5 days remaining, both boys unconscious, and Sakura keeping watch over them with a kunai in her hand and a determination in her heart that hadn't been there before. She would protect them. Whatever it took, however long it took, she would keep them safe until they woke up. She was done being useless, done being the weak link, done defining herself through others. From this moment forward, Sakura Haruno would become the kind of kunoichi who could stand beside her teammates as an equal, who could protect those precious to her, who deserved to wear the headband of a Konoha ninja. It would be a long journey to reach that goal. Years of hard training, painful lessons, and countless sacrifices lay ahead. But it started here, in this cave in the forest of death, with a girl who cut her hair and chose to fight even though she knew she'd lose. After everything Team 7 had been through, the remaining days in the forest of death were almost anticlimactic. They eventually made their way to the tower in the center, moving carefully, avoiding other teams when possible. Their Earth scroll secured safely. They'd managed to acquire a Heaven scroll from another team through a combination of strategy and luck, Sasuke recovering enough to lead them through several successful ambushes, though the curse mark remained dormant after that initial violent emergence. When they finally opened both scrolls in the tower as instructed, expecting perhaps a trap or test, what appeared was far more meaningful. Iruka, their academy teacher, summoned through a jutsu embedded in the scrolls themselves. He'd appeared to congratulate them personally, to see them through to the next stage, and for all 3 members of Team 7, seeing their old sensei was a powerful emotional moment. Iruka represented normalcy, safety, a connection to simpler times before everything became so complicated and dangerous. The relief of making it through the second exam was short-lived. When all the teams that had successfully reached the tower assembled, the proctors announced that there were too many qualifiers. 21 genin had made it through, when the exams had expected perhaps 8 to 10 at most. This was actually a minor embarrassment for the exam organizers. Either they'd made the second stage too easy, or this generation of genin was unusually skilled. Either way, they couldn't proceed directly to the finals with this many participants. A new stage was announced immediately. Preliminary matches. One-on-one fights to be held right there in the tower's central arena. The matchups would be decided randomly by an electronic board, and the fights would continue until the winners could advance to the finals. There would be no time to prepare, no chance to strategize or recover. If your name came up, you fought immediately or forfeited. The announcement sent a wave of tension through the assembled genin. Some, like Gaara, seemed pleased by this development, eager for the chance to fight others, like Kabuto, quickly realized they had no chance of advancing further and withdrew voluntarily. Kabuto claimed his injuries from the Forest of Death were too severe to continue, but anyone who looked at him closely could tell he was lying. He was fine. He just didn't want to fight, for reasons that wouldn't become clear until much later. With Kabuto's withdrawal, 20 contestants remained, ensuring an even bracket. The electronic board at the front of the arena began to flash through names, everyone watching tensely to see who would fight first. The board stopped. Sasuke Uchiha versus Yoroi Akado. Kakashi immediately grabbed Sasuke, pulling him aside even as the other genin cleared the arena floor. The curse mark was still too unstable, too dangerous, and Kakashi knew that if it activated during the fight, Sasuke might kill his opponent, or worse. He performed a quick sealing technique, the evil sealing method, layering another seal on top of Orochimaru's curse mark to help contain it. The seal would hold as long as Sasuke didn't actively try to draw on the curse mark's power, but it was essentially a mental lock rather than a physical one. If Sasuke chose to break it, if his desire for power overcame his control, the seal would shatter. The fight began, and immediately it was clear that Yoroi had a powerful and dangerous ability. He could absorb chakra through physical contact. Every time he touched Sasuke, the Uchiha heir felt his energy drain, his strength ebbing away, leaving him weaker and slower. It was a perfect counter to someone like Sasuke, who relied heavily on chakra-intensive techniques like the Sharingan. The curse mark throbbed at his neck, whispering promises of power, telling him he could end this fight in seconds if he just let it free. But Sasuke resisted the temptation, gritting his teeth through the strain. What he did instead was surprising. He copied Rock Lee's taijutsu. During their brief confrontation before the exams began, Sasuke had watched Lee fight. and his Sharingan had recorded every movement, every technique. Now, pushed to his limits and unable to rely on his chakra, Sasuke pulled out those copied techniques, moving with a speed and precision that shocked the audience. The combination was devastating. Lee's taijutsu style, adapted and refined through the Sharingan's perfect copying ability, and it culminated in the Lion Combo, a series of strikes that launched Yoroi into the air and then slammed him back down with brutal force. Yoroi didn't get back up. Victory, Sasuke Uchiha. In the stands, Rock Lee watched with mixed emotions. He'd spent years perfecting those techniques, working harder than anyone else to compensate for his inability to use ninjutsu or genjutsu. And Sasuke had just copied them in a single glance and used them better than Lee himself could. It was impressive and infuriating at the same time, a stark reminder of the gap that bloodline abilities created between ninja. The matches continued, each one revealing new fighters and new abilities. Shino Aburami's insects proved devastating against Zaku's sound techniques. Kankuro's puppetry fooled and defeated Misumi. Sakura and Ino fought to a bitter draw, knocking each other unconscious simultaneously. Temari's wind techniques overwhelmed Tenten's weapons. Shikamaru's brilliant strategy defeated Kin, despite her attempts to counter his shadow possession. Naruto used cunning and determination to overcome Kiba and Akamaru. Then came the fight that broke hearts throughout the arena. Hinata Hyuga versus Neji Hyuga. The Hyuga clan's division into main and branch families created a bitter resentment in Neji, who'd been branded with a curse seal that would kill him if he ever tried to harm a main family member or rebel against them. Hinata represented everything he hated about the clan structure: privileged, protected, weak, because she'd never had to struggle. He attacked her with a cruelty that went beyond what was necessary to win, every strike designed to humiliate and hurt, his gentle fist techniques closing off her chakra points one by one. But Hinata refused to give up, inspired by Naruto's determination, by his refusal to back down. No matter how many times life knocked him down, she kept fighting, even when it was clear she'd lost. She took blow after blow, her body failing, blood running from her mouth, but she kept getting back up, kept trying to fight, until Neji was literally forced to go for a killing blow to end it. Only the intervention of the Jonin stopped him from permanently injuring or killing his own cousin. Hinata had lost, but in a way, she'd won something more important: Naruto's respect, and proof to herself that she could be brave, that she could fight for what she believed in, even when facing overwhelming odds. The fight that followed became legend, one that people would talk about for years afterward. The match that showed just how far talent and determination could push the human body beyond its limits. Rock Lee versus Gaara of the Sand. Everyone knew Gaara was dangerous. His performance in the Forest of Death had been terrifying. The ease with which he'd killed other Genin, making it clear he was on a completely different level than everyone else. His sand defense had proven impenetrable so far, an automatic protection that reacted faster than conscious thought, and his willingness to kill made him someone that even the other Genin feared. Lee faced this monster with a smile on his face and fire in his eyes. When the fight began, his taijutsu was impressive, but ineffective. Every punch and kick was blocked by Gaara's sand before it could connect, the grains moving like liquid to intercept any attack. Gaara didn't even seem to be trying, his expression bored as Lee exhausted himself against an impenetrable defense. Then Lee asked his sensei, Might Guy, for permission. "May I remove them?" Guy's response was solemn. "Yes, take them off." Lee reached down to his ankles, and everyone assumed he was tightening his leg warmers or adjusting his equipment. Instead, he began unwrapping them, and when he dropped the orange bands to the ground, the impact cracked the stone floor beneath them. Weight training straps. Lee had been fighting with massive weights strapped to his legs, limiting his speed, forcing his body to work harder for every movement. Without the weights, Lee moved. The speed was incredible, faster than most of the watching Jonin could properly track. Suddenly, Gaara's sand couldn't keep up Lee's fists, and feet hammered into the sand defense, creating openings, and for the first time in probably his entire life, Gaara felt hits landing on his body. The shock on his face was almost comical. He'd relied on his sand for so long that he'd never developed any real taijutsu skills, never learned how to take a hit or block or dodge. He was helpless before Lee's assault. Lee used the front lotus, a forbidden technique that put enormous strain on the body, wrapping Gaara in bandages and pile-driving him into the ground from high in the air. The impact created a crater, dust billowing up, and everyone thought it was over. But Gaara's sand had formed a protective shell at the last moment, sacrificing itself to cushion the impact. Gaara emerged from the dust cloud, shaken but largely unhurt, his sand already forming around him again for protection. And now he looked genuinely angry, that bored expression replaced by something darker and more dangerous. Lee was exhausted from using the front lotus, his muscles screaming. But he wasn't done. With Gai's reluctant permission, he opened the inner gates, the limiters on his chakra system that prevented the body from using its full power. Opening them granted enormous strength and speed, but also dealt progressive damage to the body, burning through his life force. With 5 of the 8 gates opened, Lee's speed reached a level that was frankly terrifying to watch. He became a green blur, his movements creating shockwaves in the air, and he unleashed the hidden lotus, an even more destructive version of the first technique. This time, Gaara's defense failed completely. The gourd on his back, which was full of sand, crumbled under the assault. Gaara's body took the full force of the impact, slamming into the ground with enough force to create a massive crater. The arena was silent, everyone certain that Gaara had to be dead, or at least unconscious. Then the sand moved. Gaara stood up, his body cracked like porcelain where Lee's attack had broken through the layer of sand that covered his skin. But he was alive, conscious, and absolutely enraged. The sand that poured from his gourd formed into a massive claw, shooting toward Lee with killing intent. Lee couldn't move. His body had given everything it had, the gates burning through his chakra and his muscles, and he was barely standing. The sand claw hit him, and Guy intervened, catching his student before the attack could kill him. But the damage was done. Lee's left arm and leg were crushed, the bones shattered, and the medical ninja who examined him afterward would deliver devastating news. Lee's fighting career was likely over. The damage was so severe that even if he recovered, he'd never fight at his previous level. Victory, Gaara, but it felt hollow. Everyone in that arena had just watched a boy with no natural talent, no bloodline ability, no special techniques beyond what any ninja could theoretically learn. Push a monster to his absolute limits through nothing but hard work and determination. Lee had lost the fight, but won everyone's respect. And even Gaara seemed shaken by the experience, confused by Lee's refusal to stay down, by his willingness to destroy his own body rather than give up. The remaining preliminary matches concluded with Naruto's name being called for what would become one of the finals marquee matchups. Naruto Uzumaki versus Neji Hyuga. The finals would be held 1 month later, giving all participants time to train and prepare. 8 victors would advance: Sasuke Uchiha, Shino Aburame, Kankuro, Tamari, Shikamaru Nara, Naruto Uzumaki, Dosu Kanuta, and Gaara. 1 month to prepare, 1 month to train, 1 month before everything would change forever. The month between preliminaries and finals became a crucial period of development for Naruto. It started with disappointment when Kakashi explained he had to focus on Sasuke because of the curse mark complications. Instead, Kakashi arranged for Ebisu to train Naruto, but that partnership quickly dissolved when Naruto caught Ebisu peeping at the hot springs. That's when Jiraiya truly entered Naruto's life. One of the legendary Sannin, Jiraiya offered to remove the 5-element seal that Orochimaru had placed on Naruto's stomach. The seal removal was both simple and dramatic. Jiraiya just placed his palm on Naruto's stomach and broke the seal. Immediately, Naruto felt his chakra flowing smoothly again, the constant disruption finally gone. But Jiraiya's help came with conditions. Naruto would accompany him to search for Tsunade, and during the journey, he'd learn a technique that most Jonin could never master, the Rasengan, invented by the 4th Hokage himself. The Rasengan was deceptively simple, a ball of spinning chakra, condensed and rotating at devastating speed. No hand seals, no elemental affinity needed, just pure chakra manipulation. But the control required was staggering, which is why so few could master it. Jiraiya broke the training into 3 stages. First, Naruto had to learn rotation by spinning chakra inside a water balloon until it burst from internal pressure. Second, he'd add power by doing the same with a rubber ball, requiring much greater force. Finally, he'd combine rotation and power while maintaining containment, forming the Rasengan in his hand without any external shell. Naruto threw himself into the training with manic energy. The first stage took days of near constant practice, his hands cramping, his chakra exhausting. But when he finally burst that first balloon, his triumphant yell echoed across the training ground. The second stage was harder. The rubber ball gave no visual feedback, requiring him to rely purely on feel. This took over a week of constant attempts. But when that rubber ball finally tore apart from the force inside, Naruto knew he was close to something special. The third stage nearly defeated him. Without the balloon or ball to contain the chakra, the Rasengan would immediately destabilize. He had to learn to be his own container, using a thin shell of chakra around the spinning core while simultaneously maintaining rotation and power. 3 complex manipulations at once. But Naruto had one crucial advantage: shadow clones. Each one could practice simultaneously, sharing experiences when they dispersed. It was like training for 12 hours in a single hour, exponentially increasing his learning speed. Even with clones, the third stage consumed the rest of the month. There were moments when frustration nearly overwhelmed him, when the Rasengan dispersed yet again, despite coming so close. But Jiraiya's gruff encouragement helped, and more importantly, Naruto's stubborn refusal to be defeated drove him forward. Meanwhile, Sasuke underwent his own intense training with Kakashi, learning the Chidori, the lightning blade. This A-rank jutsu concentrated lightning chakra into the user's hand until it crackled with visible electricity, screaming like 1,000 birds. The technique required charging directly at the target, making it risky, but the Sharingan compensated for this weakness by allowing the user to see and react to counter moves. The training was grueling. Lightning chakra was notoriously difficult to manipulate, and concentrating it to Chidori levels took enormous control. Sasuke's first attempts resulted in painful shocks, leaving his hand numb. But like Naruto, he refused to give up, driven by his need for revenge against Itachi and, increasingly, his frustration at feeling like he was falling behind Naruto. As the month drew to a close, anticipation built throughout Konoha. The finals were a major event, drawing crowds from across the land of fire and beyond. Nobles, dignitaries, and leaders from various villages would attend. It was entertainment, certainly, but also diplomacy, a demonstration of each village's strength, a chance to showcase the next generation. Nobody could have predicted how drastically those finals would be interrupted, or how much blood would be spilled before the sun set that day. The stadium was packed with thousands of people, civilians excited for the spectacle, ninja from villages across the continent evaluating potential threats. In the highest box sat the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, alongside what appeared to be the fourth Kazekage. Around them sat feudal lords and important figures whose support kept villages running. This was as much political theatre as sporting event. The 8 finalists stood in the arena, though one glaring absence drew attention. Sasuke Uchiha hadn't arrived. His match against Gaara was scheduled first, but with no sign of him, officials postponed it and moved on. Naruto versus Neji began with stark contrast. Neji stood with perfect posture, his Byakugan active, veins bulging around his eyes as he examined Naruto with 360-degree vision. His expression was serene, confident, certain of victory. This wasn't even a real fight in his mind, just a demonstration, a lesson for someone who didn't understand how the world worked. Naruto looked nervous, despite his efforts at confidence, his orange jumpsuit bright against pale arena floor. But his eyes showed determination, fixed on Neji with surprising intensity. This wasn't just about advancing, it was personal, about proving destiny wasn't real, that hard work could overcome natural talent, that a dead last could stand against a genius and win. The match began with Neji immediately on offense. His gentle fist targeted specific chakra points, each strike blocking chakra flow, weakening Naruto progressively. Naruto tried countering with shadow clones, flooding the arena with copies, trying to overwhelm through sheer numbers. But the Byakugan saw through them instantly, and Neji's strikes dispersed fakes like mist until only the real Naruto remained. The crowd murmured. This was going exactly as expected. Genius, effortlessly dismantling fool. Some were already bored, ready for the match to end. Neji lectured as he fought, his voice carrying clearly. You cannot change who you are, Naruto. A failure will always be a failure. I was born a genius of the Hyuga clan, gifted with the Byakugan, trained in techniques you could never master. You were born a nobody, the dead last, with no special abilities, no family legacy. That is your destiny. You can struggle all you want, but you cannot escape what you were born to be. Each strike punctuated his words, driving Naruto back, closing chakra points, weakening him. The fight seemed over when Neji used his ultimate technique, 8 trigrams, 64 palms, systematically shutting down Naruto's entire chakra network. The final strike sent Naruto flying into the arena wall, leaving him slumped and motionless. It's over, Neji declared, turning away dismissively. You fought well for someone with your limitations, but destiny cannot be denied. But then Naruto moved. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up, one hand clutching the wall for support, body shaking with effort. His chakra should have been completely sealed, making it impossible to continue, but somehow he was standing, defiant. You talk about destiny like it's already decided, Naruto said, voice raspy, but growing stronger. Like we're all just following some script written before we were born. But you're wrong, Neji. People can change. They can grow. They can become something other than what they were born to be. I'm proof of that. Red chakra began leaking from Naruto's body, the Nine Tails energy responding to his desperation and determination. The Byakugan couldn't see it clearly, couldn't fully perceive the demonic chakra, and Neji's confidence faltered for the first time as he felt the malevolent power radiating from his opponent. What followed was a brutal, desperate brawl. Naruto, fueled by Fox chakra, moved faster and hit harder than should have been possible with sealed chakra. Neji pushed for the first time in his life, responded with everything he had, mixing gentle fist with 8 trigrams palms rotation, a defensive technique, creating a dome of spinning chakra around him. The fight came down to a single moment. Neji had Naruto on the ground, had delivered what should have been a finishing blow, when Naruto tapped into Ninetales' chakra one more time, using it to create a single shadow clone beneath the arena floor, using a tunnel dug during the fight. That clone erupted from the ground behind Neji, catching him completely by surprise, delivering an uppercut that lifted the Hyuga genius off his feet and knocked him unconscious. The stadium was silent for a long moment, everyone processing what they'd just seen. Then the crowd erupted in deafening cheers. The dead last had defeated the genius. The failure had overcome destiny. As Naruto stood over Neji's unconscious form, breathing hard, he said something only those closest could hear. "Don't call yourself a failure, Neji. The only time you fail is when you stop trying." Those words would change Neji's life, planting a seed that would eventually blossom into complete transformation of his philosophy and relationship with his clan. The next match was Shikamaru versus Temari, showcasing completely different ninja combat. Where Naruto and Neji had been about power and determination, this was strategy and tactics. Shikamaru's shadow possession could control an opponent's movements if he connected his shadow to theirs, but Temari's wind techniques kept pushing him back. The fight seemed one-sided until the very end, when Shikamaru revealed everything he'd done. Every seemingly random or desperate move had been part of a larger plan, using the tunnel Naruto had dug, using shadows cast by walls and tower, using Temari's own movements against her. Shikamaru connected their shadows, taking control of her body. He had won. Everyone knew it. Shikamaru could now force her to concede or knock herself unconscious. Instead, to everyone's shock, Shikamaru raised his hand and forfeited. "I'm out of chakra," he explained with characteristic laziness. "Even if I won this match, I wouldn't have enough energy for the next one. Better to quit now than get beat even worse later." Finally, Sasuke arrived, appearing in a swirl of leaves with Kakashi, his dramatic entrance earning cheers. His match against Gaara could finally begin. The last Uchiha against the Sans Jinchuriki, 2 prodigies with reputations for being monsters. The fight began explosively. Sasuke had copied Lee's speed during preliminaries, and now he demonstrated it to devastating effect, moving faster than Gaara's sand could properly defend. He landed hits, actual physical strikes, getting through the automatic defense, something that rarely happened. Gaara's face showed genuine shock, and, for the first time in perhaps his entire life, fear. Someone had hurt him. Someone was threatening him. The monster inside him, Shukaku, was screaming for blood. Sasuke built up to his ultimate technique, the Chidori. Lightning chakra crackled and screamed in his hand as he charged, and for a brief moment, it seemed like he might actually win. The Chidori pierced through Gaara's sand defense, through the hardened shell covering his body, actually drawing blood. And that's when everything went wrong. Gaara screamed, a sound of pure primal terror and rage, and his transformation began immediately, sand consuming him, Shukaku starting to emerge. At the same moment, feathers began falling from the sky, and genjutsu washed over the stadium, putting most civilians to sleep instantly. Ninja throughout the stands fought off the genjutsu, and as they did, they saw their worst nightmare, sound and sand. Ninja revealing themselves throughout the crowd, attacking, and outside the stadium, giant snakes smashing through village walls as an army poured in. The invasion had begun. Operation Konoha Crush was underway. High in the Hokage's box, Hiruzen Sarutobi found himself facing a nightmare scenario. The fourth Kazekage beside him had transformed, shedding his disguise to reveal someone Hiruzen had desperately hoped never to see again. Orochimaru, his former student, one of the legendary Sannin, and now a terrorist who'd just brought an army to Konoha's doorstep. 4 sound ninja appeared around them, forming hand seals in perfect synchronization, and a barrier snapped into existence. The 4 violet flames formation, a box of purple energy that would incinerate anyone trying to pass through it. Anbu guards protecting the Hokage immediately tried to break through, but were forced back by the barrier's flames. Hiruzen was trapped alone with 5 enemies, isolated from his village at the moment it needed him most.
"Hello, Sensei!"
Orochimaru said, voice carrying that familiar mix of mockery and false affection.
"It's been too long. I trust you've been well."
Orochimaru, Hiruzen said, and despite the fear running through him, his voice was steady. "Why have you come? What do you hope to accomplish with this madness?" "Accomplish?" Orochimaru's laugh was cold. "I'm not trying to accomplish anything specific, Sensei. This is about proving a point, about demonstrating that your precious village isn't as strong as it pretends to be, about showing the world that the age of Konoha is over. But mostly," his smile widened, "this is about revenge. You rejected me, expelled me, chose others over me. Now I'll take everything from you, starting with your life." Hiruzen sighed, and in that moment, he looked every one of his nearly 70 years. "Then I have failed you completely as a teacher. I had hoped that somewhere in your heart, the boy I once trained still existed, but I see now that Orochimaru died long ago. What stands before me is merely a monster wearing his face." "How poetic," Orochimaru mocked. "Shall we begin?" He bit his thumb, drawing blood, and slammed his hand to the rooftop. 3 coffins rose from beneath the tiles, wood creaking as they stood upright. The first 2 lids fell away, revealing the reanimated corpses of the first and second Hokage, Hashirama and Tobirama Senju, Hiruzen's own teachers, and Konoha's founders. They stood with blank eyes and pale skin, mindless puppets awaiting commands. The ultimate desecration of heroes who'd given everything for the village. Hiruzen's horror was palpable. The Edo Tensei, the impure world reincarnation, was supposed to be forbidden, sealed away, never to be used. That Orochimaru had not only learned it, but perfected it, was testament to his genius and utter lack of morality. A 3rd coffin began rising, marked with the character for 4, and Hiruzen realized Orochimaru was trying to summon the 4th Hokage as well, Minato Namikaze, the man who'd sealed the 9 Tails. Desperate, Hiruzen formed hand seals faster than he had in years, slamming his will against the summoning jutsu, and managed to force the 3rd coffin back down before it could fully manifest the Reaper Death Seal that Minato had used when he died, prevented his soul from being fully summoned, giving Hiruzen the opening he needed to stop it. But 2 former Hokage were more than enough. Hashirama formed hand seals, and massive trees erupted from the rooftop. The wood release he'd been legendary for. The technique no one had replicated since his death. Tobirama used water release, creating massive waves without any water source nearby. His mastery so absolute he could literally create water from nothing. Hiruzen fought desperately, using techniques from all 5 basic nature transformations, earth and water, and fire and wind and lightning, combining them in ways that demonstrated why he'd been called the Professor, the ninja who knew every jutsu. He summoned Enma, the Monkey King, who transformed into a staff that could extend and strike with devastating force. But he was old and tired, and fighting enemies who felt no pain, had unlimited chakra, and couldn't be killed by conventional means. The Hokage could have run, could have tried to escape the barrier to save himself and coordinate defense from somewhere safer. But that wasn't an option. As long as Orochimaru remained alive, as long as he could use Edo Tensei to raise the dead and attack Konoha, the village would never be safe. This had to end here, even if it cost Hiruzen everything. He began forming hand seals for the Reaper Death Seal, the same jutsu Minato had used 12 years ago, the technique that would summon the Shinigami, the god of death itself, to seal away an opponent's soul at the cost of the user's own life. It was a suicide technique, traded life for life, and Hiruzen knew when he started it that he wouldn't survive this battle. The Shinigami appeared behind him, a massive spectral figure visible only to those involved in the sealing, its face covered, its hand holding a ritual blade. It reached through Hiruzen's body, and the old Hokage grabbed Hashirama and Tobirama, forcing the death god's spectral arms to reach through them as well. Their souls were ripped from reanimated bodies, pulled screaming into the Shinigami's belly, where they would spend eternity battling each other, locked in endless conflict. The bodies that had contained them crumbled, revealing the real victims of this jutsu, Kin and Zaku, the sound genin who'd been sacrificed to give the dead flesh to inhabit. But Hiruzen's strength was fading. Using the Reaper Death Seal was like trying to fight while dying, every second bringing him closer to death, his chakra burning away as fuel for the jutsu. He turned toward Orochimaru, reaching for him, intending to seal his former student's soul the same way. But Orochimaru saw it coming and stabbed him, the Kusanagi sword punching through Hiruzen's back, emerging from his chest in a spray of blood. The pain was shocking, overwhelming, and Hiruzen's concentration wavered. He couldn't seal all of Orochimaru's soul, didn't have the strength left. So he settled for what he could. Grasping Orochimaru's arms, he had the Shinigami seal just those, taking away his former student's ability to form hand seals, crippling his ability to use most jutsu. Orochimaru's scream was satisfying, the first genuine pain and fear Hiruzen had seen from him. His arms withered and died, the flesh rotting as the soul within them was consumed, leaving him with arms that looked like a mummy's, completely unusable. He'd survive, but crippled, weakened, and that would have to be enough. Hiruzen collapsed, the sword still through his chest, blood pooling beneath him. His vision was fading, his hearing going, but he could see Orochimaru retreating, could see the sound ninja lowering their barrier, could hear sounds of battle throughout the village below. Konoha would survive. His students and the other ninja would drive off the invaders. The village would endure. His last thoughts were of his students, all of them, Jiraiya and Tsunade, and even Orochimaru, the children he'd trained so long ago, Asuma, his own son, who he'd never spent enough time with, all the generations of ninja he'd taught and guided over his long life. He hoped he'd done enough, hoped that what he'd passed on would be sufficient to keep the village safe. "The will of fire will burn on," he whispered, blood on his lips. "The leaves may fall, but the tree remains, and new leaves will grow in their place." And then, Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage of Konoha Crush, the professor, the god of shinobi, died on that rooftop, his sacrifice buying the village time and weakening one of their greatest threats. The battle raged throughout Konoha for hours. Ninja fought in the streets, on rooftops, in the forests surrounding the village. The giant snakes that Orochimaru had summoned wreaked havoc until Jiraiya arrived, summoning his own toads to counter them. Massive kaiju battles shaking the ground. Team 7 pursued Gaara into the forest, where the Jinchuriki completed his transformation, Shukaku fully manifesting. a massive tanuki made of sand that threatened to level everything around it. Naruto summoned Gamabunta, the boss toad, and fought Shukaku in a clash that shook the forest. The strategy they used was insane. Naruto transformed into a massive fox, using transformation jutsu and Gamabunta's body as a base, essentially creating a giant fox-toad hybrid that headbutted Shukaku and managed to wake Gaara from his forced sleep, ending the transformation. As Gaara lay there, defeated and confused, Naruto did something unexpected. He talked to him, not with anger or triumph, but with understanding. He recognized the loneliness in Gaara's eyes, the same isolation that had defined Naruto's own childhood. Two Jinchuriki, two children who'd been ostracized and hated for the monsters sealed inside them. And Naruto reached out to Gaara with empathy and compassion. "I know what it's like," Naruto said, "being alone, having everyone look at you like you're a monster. But it doesn't have to be that way, Gaara. You can choose to protect people instead of hurting them. You can be more than what they think you are." Those words cracked something inside Gaara that had been frozen for years. For the first time since his uncle had tried to assassinate him as a child, Gaara felt something other than rage and loneliness. He felt hope, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to be a monster, that he could change. By nightfall, the battle was over. The Sound and Sand forces retreated, their losses too heavy to continue. Konoha had survived, but the cost had been enormous, hundreds of ninja dead, civilians killed in crossfire, large portions of the village damaged or destroyed, and the third Hokage gone, leaving a void in leadership at the worst possible time. The funeral was held 3 days later. The entire village turned out, thousands of people standing in the rain as they said goodbye to a man who'd led them through 2 terms as Hokage, who'd guided the village through wars and peace, who'd been the grandfather figure for an entire generation of ninja. Naruto stood in the crowd, tears streaming down his face, and for the first time truly understood what it meant to be Hokage. It wasn't about being strong or famous or respected. It was about being willing to die for your village, to sacrifice everything to protect the people you loved. The third Hokage had done that, had chosen death rather than let Orochimaru continue to threaten Konoha. That was the standard Naruto would have to meet if he ever wanted to become Hokage himself. Not just strength, but the willingness to give everything, to make the hardest choices, to put the village above himself every single time. It was a heavy burden for a 12-year-old to contemplate, but it was one he accepted, standing there in the rain, making a silent vow to the third Hokage's memory that he would become worthy of the title, that he would protect the village the way Hiruzen had. The question now was, who would lead Konoha through the difficult days ahead? Who would become the 5th Hokage? The village elders wasted no time. Danzo, that shadowy figure who operated from the darkness, immediately began maneuvering to place himself in the Hokage position, arguing that Konoha needed a strong military leader who wouldn't hesitate to make hard decisions. But Homura and Koharu, the 2 civilian elders who'd been advisors since the 2nd Hokage's time, had a different candidate in mind. Jiraiya of the legendary Sannin. Jiraiya was powerful, respected, and had a direct connection to the 3rd Hokage as his student. He was also currently in the village, which made offering him the position convenient. When they approached him with the offer, everyone expected him to accept. Being named Hokage was the highest honor a ninja could receive, the pinnacle of a shinobi career. Instead, Jiraiya laughed in their faces. "Me? Hokage? Are you out of your minds? I'm a terrible choice. I'm irresponsible. I spend most of my time researching my novels in hot springs, and I have absolutely no interest in being tied down to a desk doing paperwork for the rest of my life." The elders tried to argue, to convince him that duty demanded he accept, but Jiraiya was immovable. He did, however, have a counter-proposal. Tsunade, the other member of the legendary Sannin, granddaughter of the first Hokage, legendary medical ninja, and someone who actually had leadership qualities that went beyond hitting things really hard or writing novels. The elders were skeptical. Tsunade had left the village years ago and hadn't been heard from since. Nobody knew where she was or if she'd even be willing to return. But Jiraiya assured them he could find her, that he knew her well enough to track her movements, and that he'd personally convince her to take the position. There was one condition, though. He wanted to bring Naruto with him. The elders immediately objected. Naruto was a Jinchuriki, the container for the nine-tailed fox, and taking him outside the village, where he'd be vulnerable to enemies like the Akatsuki, was dangerous. But Jiraiya pointed out that the Akatsuki had already proven they could infiltrate Konoha, as evidenced by Itachi's recent visit, and that keeping Naruto inside the village wasn't necessarily safer than having him travel with one of the legendary Sannin. Besides, Jiraiya could train Naruto properly while they traveled, something that clearly needed to happen given the threats they were facing. Reluctantly, the elders agreed. They didn't have much choice. Without Jiraiya's help, finding Tsunade would be nearly impossible, and they needed a Hokage soon. The village was vulnerable, morale was low, and leadership had to be established before their enemies sensed weakness and attacked again. So Jiraiya and Naruto set out, leaving Konoha behind on a journey that would take them across the land of fire and beyond in search of a woman who didn't want to be found. To understand Tsunade and why finding her mattered so much, we need to go back decades, to a team of 3 young ninja who would eventually reshape the shinobi world through their actions and their legend. Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru had been assigned to the same genin team under Hiruzen Sarutobi when he was still a jonin instructor, years before he'd become the 3rd Hokage. They were a diverse group with wildly different personalities and approaches to being ninja, but that diversity was part of what made them effective. Jiraiya was the loudest of the 3, boisterous and confident to the point of arrogance, though his skill backed up his bravado. He had a talent for summoning jutsu and sage techniques, his contract with the toads of Mount Myoboku giving him access to powerful allies and unique abilities. But he was also immature, constantly hitting on women, pulling pranks, and generally being the kind of student that drove instructors crazy. Hiruzen saw potential in him, though, a core of genuine heroism beneath all the foolishness, a desire to protect people and do what was right even when it was difficult. Orochimaru was the genius, cold and analytical, approaching ninjutsu like a science to be studied and perfected. Where Jiraiya relied on instinct and power, Orochimaru used precision and innovation, constantly developing new techniques or improving existing ones. He excelled at everything he attempted, earning praise from their instructors and setting records at the academy. But there was something missing in him, an emotional void that made his brilliance feel hollow. He didn't connect with people the way normal humans did. He studied them like specimens, analyzed them like puzzles to be solved. Tsunade was the bridge between them, more serious than Jiraiya, but warmer than Orochimaru. As the granddaughter of Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage, she carried enormous expectations and legacy on her shoulders. She was expected to be great simply because of her bloodline, and she'd worked hard to live up to that expectation, developing medical ninjutsu to unprecedented levels, while also possessing physical strength that was frankly absurd. She could shatter boulders with a punch, crater the ground with a kick, and heal injuries that would have been fatal to anyone else. Hiruzen trained them in the fundamentals, teaching them the bell test that would later become famous when Kakashi used it on his own students. The test was simple: take a bell from the instructor. But the real lesson wasn't about combat or tactics. It was about teamwork. about recognizing that working together was more important than individual achievement. Tsunade was the first to grasp this lesson, bringing the team together, using their different strengths to complement each other. But it was war that truly forged them into the legendary Sannin. The Second Shinobi World War erupted when they were still young, barely more than teenagers, and they were thrown into combat alongside countless other Konoha ninja. The war was brutal, grinding, nothing like the idealized version of combat they trained for. People died, friends died, entire squads were wiped out in battles over meaningless stretches of territory that would be lost and retaken a dozen times before the war ended. During one particularly desperate battle in Amegakure, the hidden rain village that was caught between the larger nations and used as a battleground, their entire unit was slaughtered except for the three of them. They faced Hanzo of the Salamander, a ninja so powerful and so feared that entire armies would retreat at the mention of his name. Hanzo was a master of poison, using a salamander summon whose venom could kill dozens of people with a single breath. And he'd been instrumental in keeping the Rain Village independent despite being surrounded by enemies. The three of them fought him together, combining their techniques in ways they never had before, pushing each other to their absolute limits, and somehow, impossibly, they survived. They didn't win. Hanzo was too powerful for that, and if he'd wanted to kill them, he probably could have. But they'd impressed him, these three young ninja who fought with such coordination and skill, and in a rare moment of respect, he named them the legendary Sannin of Konoha, declaring that their fame would spread throughout the shinobi world. After the battle, they encountered three orphan children, Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato. The kids had lost everything to the war, their families dead, their homes destroyed, and they begged the Sannin to teach them ninjutsu so they could protect themselves. Orochimaru's first instinct was to kill them as potential future enemies, a cold calculation that their sensei Hiruzen would have been horrified by Tsunade, wanted to take them to an orphanage, or find someone local to care for them. But Jiraiya saw something else, an opportunity to make a difference, to help rebuild what the war had destroyed, to give these kids a chance at a better future. He stayed in Amegakure for several years, training the three orphans, teaching them not just techniques, but also philosophy, the belief that understanding and communication could end conflict. When he finally left, he believed he'd made a difference, that he'd helped set these kids on a path toward creating peace in their war-torn homeland. He had no way of knowing that Nagato possessed the Rinnegan, the legendary dojutsu that the Sage of Six Paths himself had wielded, or that forces were already moving to manipulate the boy toward darker purposes. Those revelations would come years later, bringing tragedy and regret that would haunt Jiraiya for the rest of his life. The Sannin returned to Konoha as heroes, their legend established, their power undeniable. But the bonds between them were already beginning to fray. Orochimaru's research was becoming increasingly dark, his obsession with immortality driving him to experiments that violated every ethical boundary. Tsunade, meanwhile, was dealing with personal losses that were reshaping her worldview. Her younger brother Nawaki had died during the war, killed by an explosive trap the day after his 12th birthday, the day after she'd given him their grandfather's necklace, and he'd declared his dream of becoming Hokage. The loss had devastated her, grief mixing with guilt over whether the necklace had somehow cursed him, whether her gift had led to his death. Nawaki had been bright-eyed and optimistic, full of dreams about protecting the village their grandfather had founded. He'd looked up to Tsunade, idolized their grandfather, and wanted nothing more than to earn the title of Hokage through his own merit. On his 12th birthday, Tsunade had given him the first Hokage's necklace, a beautiful crystal pendant that their grandfather had worn, something Nawaki had always admired. She'd told him to keep it safe, that it would bring him luck as he pursued his dreams. The next day, Nawaki went on a routine mission. He stepped on an explosive trap. According to Orochimaru, who'd seen the aftermath, Nawaki's body was so heavily mutilated that it was beyond recognition. Only the necklace remained intact, retrieved by Orochimaru, and returned to a devastated Tsunade. That necklace became a curse in Tsunade's mind, a symbol of lost dreams and broken promises. Years later, she met Dan Kato, a jonin who shared her belief that every squad should have a medical ninja to prevent unnecessary deaths like her brothers. They fell in love, bonded by their shared ideals and their desire to make the shinobi world less cruel. Tsunade gave him the necklace too, hoping it would protect Dan the way it had failed to protect Nawaki. And Dan dreamed of becoming Hokage as well, wanting the position so he could implement reforms that would save lives. Dan died in her arms on a battlefield, bleeding out from wounds that even her medical expertise couldn't heal fast enough. She'd tried everything, every technique she knew, pouring all her chakra into trying to keep him alive. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. And as his blood covered her hands, as she felt his heart stop despite everything she'd done, something broke inside Tsunade. She developed hemophobia, a fear of blood so severe that she couldn't function as a medical ninja anymore. Just seeing blood would trigger panic attacks, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't form seals or perform surgery. For someone whose entire identity was built around being a healer, this was devastating. She was useless, broken, unable to do the one thing that defined who she was. The necklace, that cursed thing that had touched two people she loved and watched them both die, became a symbol of everything she'd lost. She couldn't bring herself to wear it anymore, couldn't even look at it without feeling the weight of those deaths crushing down on her. After Dan's death, Tsunade left Konoha. She took Shizune, Dan's niece, with her, ostensibly to train the girl, but really because she couldn't bear to be alone with her grief. They wandered from town to town, Tsunade gambling compulsively and losing consistently, drinking to forget, avoiding anything that reminded her of her past life as a ninja. She'd given up on being a shinobi, given up on Konoha, given up on the dream that had cost her so much. Jiraiya stayed in touch with her over the years, checking in periodically, making sure she was okay, even though it was clear she didn't want his help or anyone else's. His feelings for her had never faded. He'd been in love with Tsunade since they were children, though she'd never reciprocated. Her heart given first to Dan, and then to no one after Dan died. But Jiraiya's love wasn't possessive or demanding. He cared about her happiness more than his own desires, and if what she needed was space and independence, he'd give her that, even though it hurt. Tracking Tsunade turned out to be surprisingly easy, though not for the reasons one might expect. See, Tsunade had one very consistent character trait. She was phenomenally bad at gambling. Not just bad, but supernaturally unlucky, losing consistently at every game of chance she played. This meant she left a trail of gambling debts and furious casino owners wherever she went, making her movements easy to trace if you knew what to look for. Jiraiya knew exactly what to look for. He tracked her through a series of gambling halls and small towns, following the trail of IOUs and angry creditors, until he finally caught up to her in a town celebrating some local festival, and there she was, sitting at an outdoor restaurant with Shizune beside her, looking exactly as Jiraiya remembered, despite the years that had passed. Well, almost exactly. Tsunade had developed a transformation jutsu that made her appear younger than her actual age, maintaining the appearance of a woman in her 20s rather than someone who was actually over 50. It was vanity combined with practicality. People were less likely to recognize the granddaughter of the first Hokage if she didn't look like she was old enough to be his granddaughter. Naruto's first impression of Tsunade was not positive. She looked like some random woman drinking in the afternoon, nothing about her suggesting legendary ninja or medical genius. When Jiraiya introduced her, Naruto blurted out something about expecting someone cooler, which earned him a punch that sent him flying through a wall. The strength behind that casual strike was absurd, and Naruto revised his initial assessment immediately. Okay, maybe she was actually dangerous. Jiraiya explained why they'd come, offering Tsunade the position of 5th Hokage. Her response was to laugh, not amused laughter, but bitter, mocking sound. Hokage? You want me to be Hokage? Have you lost your mind, Jiraiya? That position is cursed. Everyone who holds it dies young, dies tragically, dies for a village that will just find someone else to sacrifice when they're gone. My grandfather, my great-uncle, my sensei, all dead. And you want me to put that target on my back? She went on a rant about how foolish the whole concept was, how the title of Hokage was just a convenient way for the village to identify who to sacrifice next, how anyone who wanted it was an idiot with delusions of grandeur. And Naruto, who'd been listening quietly up to that point, exploded. "Don't you dare talk about the Hokage like that," he shouted, getting right in Tsunade's face despite the fact that she could turn him into paste with one finger. "The Hokage isn't just some sacrificial lamb. They're the strongest ninja in the village, the person everyone looks up to, the one who protects everyone else. The 3rd Hokage died to save the village, and you're saying that was stupid, that his sacrifice didn't matter?" Tsunade looked at this angry child, this nobody from nowhere who was lecturing her about things he couldn't possibly understand. And something about his absolute conviction, his naive belief in dreams and heroism, infuriated her. It reminded her too much of Nawaki and Dan, two other idealistic fools who'd believed in the Hokage dream and died for it. "You're just a child playing at being a ninja," she said coldly. "You don't understand how the world works. Dreams don't come true just because you believe in them hard enough. Reality doesn't care about your determination or your spirit or any of that nonsense. People die, dreams die, and all your belief in the world won't change that." Naruto challenged her to a bet right there, the same kind of impulsive decision that defined him. If he could master the Rasengan in 1 week, if he could prove that belief and hard work could accomplish the impossible, then she'd have to acknowledge that dreams mattered, that the Hokage position was worth respecting, and she'd have to give him her necklace, that cursed heirloom that she couldn't stand to wear, but couldn't bring herself to throw away. Tsunade agreed, amused by the absurdity of it. The Rasengan was an A-rank jutsu that had taken the 4th Hokage years to develop, and that only a handful of people in the entire world could perform. This kid thought he could master it in a week. It was impossible, which meant the bet was safe, and maybe losing would teach him a valuable lesson about the difference between dreams and reality. What she didn't know was that Naruto had already been training in the Rasengan for a month, that he'd already completed the first 2 stages and was working on the 3rd, that he had a unique advantage through his shadow clones that let him practice at an accelerated rate. The week deadline was tight, but it wasn't impossible. Not for someone as stubborn as Naruto Uzumaki. That night, Tsunade sat in her room at the inn, staring at the necklace that rested on the table before her. In the lamplight, the crystal gleamed, beautiful and cursed, a physical reminder of everything she'd lost. She was so lost in her memories that she didn't immediately notice when Orochimaru appeared behind her, emerging from the shadows like the snake he was. "Hello, Tsunade," he said, his voice that familiar mix of mockery and false affection that she remembered from their days as teammates. "It's been too long." To her credit, Tsunade didn't scream or panic. She simply picked up a kunai and spun, ready to stab, but Orochimaru was faster, catching her wrist, Now, he said. Is that any way to greet an old friend? I come with an offer, not a threat. You're no friend of mine, Tsunade said, her voice cold. You're a monster who wears Orochimaru's face. Now get out before I break every bone in your body. Still so violent, Orochimaru said, releasing her wrist and stepping back. But I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. Look at my arms. He held them up, and even in the dim light, Tsunade could see that something was wrong with them. The flesh looked dead, grey, and withered like a corpse, and when he tried to move his fingers, nothing happened. The third Hokage did this to me, Orochimaru explained. Used the Reaper Death Seal to take away my ability to form seals, to use most jutsu. I'm crippled, Tsunade, weakened, in constant pain, and you're the only person alive who might be able to heal this. Even if I could, Tsunade said, why would I? You attacked Konoha, you killed our sensei. You're a traitor and a murderer, and if I healed you, you'd just go back to doing terrible things. Perhaps, Orochimaru admitted with his characteristic honesty. But I'm prepared to offer you something in exchange. Something I know you want more than anything else in this world. He formed a hand seal using his mouth, something Tsunade hadn't even known was possible, and two figures materialized in the room. They looked like people, like living humans, but their eyes were wrong, dull and lifeless, and their skin was too pale. Edo Tensei bodies, waiting for souls to fill them.
Nawaki, Orochimaru said, and one of the bodies shifted slightly. And Dan Kato. I can bring them back, Tsunade. I can give you what you've wanted for all these years. All you have to do is heal my arms.
The offer hit Tsunade like a physical blow. Her brother, her lover, both of them returned to life, both of them given a second chance. She could talk to Nawaki again, see him grow up, watch him achieve the dreams that had been cut short. She could be with Dan again, could feel his arms around her, could tell him all the things she'd never gotten to say before he died. All she had to do was heal a monster, help a man who'd attacked her village and killed her teacher, enable Orochimaru to continue his reign of terror and his horrific experiments. Tsunade started, and then stopped, her mind torn between desire and duty, between what she wanted and what was right. You don't have to decide now, Orochimaru said, that knowing smile playing across his lips. Think about it. Consider what you're giving up if you refuse. And remember, the dead don't care about your moral righteousness. They just want to live again. He vanished as quickly as he'd appeared, leaving Tsunade alone with two empty bodies that could become her greatest treasures or her greatest sins, depending on what she chose. The next morning, Shizune found Tsunade drunk, which wasn't unusual. But there was something different about her mentor this time. Usually, Tsunade's drinking was melancholy, sad, a way to escape her thoughts. This time, she seemed conflicted, torn, almost desperate. When Shizune asked what was wrong, Tsunade couldn't bring herself to explain. How could she admit that she was actually considering Orochimaru's offer? That she was tempted to betray everything she'd once believed in for a chance to see Nawaki and Dan again? They met up with Jiraiya and Naruto later that day to check on Naruto's progress with the Rasengan. The boy was working himself to exhaustion, dozens of shadow clones practicing simultaneously, each one trying to maintain the spinning sphere of chakra without a balloon or ball to contain it. Most failed, the Rasengan dissipating after a few seconds, but a few were getting close, maintaining it for longer periods, the sphere stabilizing. Jiraiya was impressed despite himself. You might actually pull this off, he admitted. I've never seen anyone learn it this fast except for Minato, and he invented the technique. Naruto grinned, exhausted but proud, and then collapsed as his chakra finally gave out. all the clones dispersing at once and leaving him drained. Tsunade looked at him lying there, unconscious but still smiling, and felt something twist in her chest. He reminded her too much of Nawaki, that same naive belief that dreams could come true through hard work, that same determination to become Hokage no matter what anyone said. That's when Kabuto appeared, Orochimaru's right-hand man, his round glasses glinting in the sunlight. "Tsunade-sama," he said politely. "Orochimaru-sama grows impatient. Have you made your decision?" "I'm still thinking about it," Tsunade said, which was true, but also a stalling tactic. "Then perhaps I can help motivate you," Kabuto said, and suddenly, his hand was coated in chakra, that green glow that medical ninja used for surgery, except he was weaponizing it, using his knowledge of anatomy to maximize damage rather than heal. He moved toward Naruto, still unconscious and vulnerable, clearly intending to kill the boy. Tsunade moved on instinct, her body reacting before her mind could process what was happening, putting herself between Kabuto and Naruto. The chakra scalpel sliced across her chest, blood spraying, and Tsunade froze. Blood. So much blood. Her blood. The sight of it triggered her phobia instantly, panic flooding her system, her hands starting to shake, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. She couldn't move, couldn't defend herself, couldn't do anything but stare at the blood and remember Dan dying in her arms, his blood covering her hands, his life draining away despite everything she tried. Kabuto pressed his advantage, attacking ruthlessly, knowing that Tsunade was helpless in this state. Jiraiya tried to intervene, but Kabuto was faster and more skilled than expected, his medical knowledge making him a terrifying opponent who knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. Within minutes, Jiraiya was down, his legs sliced, his chakra network disrupted, unable to properly mold chakra for jutsu. Tsunade watched it all happen, frozen by her phobia, useless when her teammate needed her. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, why she'd left Konoha in the first place. She was broken, unreliable, a liability rather than an asset. Then Naruto moved. Despite being exhausted and out of chakra, despite having just woken up from passing out, he put himself between Tsunade and Kabuto, his stance shaky but determined. "You're not hurting anyone else," Naruto said, and there was steel in his voice despite his obvious weakness. "I won't let you." "You can't even stand properly," Kabuto pointed out reasonably. "You're out of chakra, exhausted, and completely outmatched. Why don't you just stay down like a smart person?" "Because that's not what a ninja does," Naruto said. "We don't give up just because things look bad. We fight anyway. We protect people anyway. Even if we die, we do it standing up." Kabuto sighed and attacked, his chakra scalpel aiming for Naruto's neck, a killing blow. And Naruto met him with a Rasengan, incomplete but functional, the spinning sphere of chakra slamming into Kabuto's stomach and sending him flying backward, the impact crater he left in the ground testament to the technique's power. Naruto had completed it. In 1 week, he'd mastered the Rasengan, doing something that should have been impossible, and he'd done it to protect someone, using his power to defend rather than to attack, embodying everything that the Hokage was supposed to represent. Tsunade stared at him, this impossible child who'd just proven her wrong about everything, who demonstrated that dreams could come true if you worked hard enough. That belief and determination actually mattered. The sight of his conviction, his refusal to give up even when every logical reason said he should, broke through the wall of cynicism she'd built around her heart. The blood on her chest didn't seem quite as terrifying anymore, or rather, it was still terrifying, still triggered her phobia, but she could push through it. For this boy who'd just proven that impossible things could happen, she could be stronger than her fear. Orochimaru appeared then, stepping out of the forest with characteristic dramatic timing. "Kabuto, I believe you've made your point. Tsunade, I think it's time for your answer. Will you heal my arms, or will I have to take more aggressive measures to convince you? Tsunade looked at him, this person who'd once been her teammate, who'd trained beside her and fought beside her, and who'd become something monstrous. She looked at the bodies he'd brought, the empty vessels waiting to be filled with the souls of people she loved. She looked at Naruto, bleeding and exhausted, but still standing, still defiant. I've made my decision, she said, and her voice was steady despite the blood still visible on her chest, despite the fear still clawing at her. The answer is no. I won't heal you. I won't help you. Nawaki and Dan wouldn't want to come back if it meant helping someone like you, and more importantly, I don't want them back if it costs me my soul. Orochimaru's smile vanished, replaced by cold fury. Then you've chosen poorly. I'll take what I need from you by force. The fight that erupted was legendary. 3 former teammates facing off with their most powerful techniques. Orochimaru summoned Manda. The giant snake boss, Jiraiya, recovered enough to fight, summoned Gamabunta, the giant toad boss. And Tsunade summoned Katsuyu, the slug queen, whose body could split into thousands of smaller slugs, making her almost impossible to kill and allowing her to heal allies from a distance. The 3 giant summons battled while their summoners fought on top of them, leaping between the massive creatures, trading techniques that leveled trees and cratered the ground. Orochimaru used snake techniques, transforming his body in disturbing and effective ways. Jiraiya countered with toad oil flames and swamp techniques. And Tsunade, her phobia overcome through sheer will, punched with enough force to split the ground, her medical knowledge letting her maximize damage with precise chakra control. Naruto watched from the sidelines, trying to help, but knowing he was outmatched by this level of combat. These were the legendary Sannin, 3 of the most powerful ninja alive, and the battle between them was reshaping the landscape. But Orochimaru was weakened by his arms, unable to use most of his best jutsu, and Tsunade was freshly motivated, fighting with a passion she hadn't felt in years. Slowly, steadily, she and Jiraiya pushed Orochimaru back, until finally Tsunade landed a devastating punch directly to Orochimaru's chest. The impact audible from hundreds of meters away. Orochimaru flew backward, crashing through trees, and when he struggled to his feet, blood was running from his mouth. "This isn't over," he said, and his voice carried a promise of future conflict. "You've chosen your side, Tsunade. I hope you don't regret it when your village burns and everyone you care about dies." He fled then, Kabuto helping him escape, and neither Jiraiya nor Tsunade had the energy left to pursue. They'd won, but barely, and the cost had been enormous. Naruto approached Tsunade, holding out her necklace, the one he'd won through their bet. "Here," he said. "You promised this if I learned the Rasengan. I don't actually want it though. You should keep it. I think your brother and Dan would want you to wear it, to remember them by, and to remember what they dreamed of." Tsunade looked at the necklace, that cursed thing that had touched 2 people she loved, and for the first time in years, she saw it differently. Not as a symbol of death, but as a symbol of dreams, of hope, of the belief that tomorrow could be better than today. Nawaki and Dan had died, yes, but they died believing in something, fighting for something, and that belief was worth honoring. She took the necklace and, for the first time since Dan's death, put it on. The weight of it around her neck felt right, like reclaiming a part of herself that had been missing. "All right," she said, looking at Jiraiya. "I'll do it. I'll be the 5th Hokage, but I'm doing it my way, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can deal with me personally." Jiraiya grinned, genuine happiness lighting up his face. "Wouldn't expect anything else from you, Tsunade. Welcome back." The journey back to Konoha was quiet, all of them exhausted from the battle, each processing what had happened in their own way. Naruto was proud of himself for learning the Rasengan and changing Tsunade's mind. Jiraiya was relieved to have found Tsunade and convinced her to return. And Tsunade herself was nervous, returning to a village she'd abandoned years ago, to responsibilities she'd fled from, to memories both precious and painful. When they arrived at Konoha's gates, word spread quickly. The legendary Tsunade had returned. The granddaughter of the first Hokage was back. The village had its new leader. People lined the streets to catch a glimpse of her, some recognizing her despite the transformation jutsu, others just curious about the woman who would lead them through the difficult days ahead. The elders met with her immediately, formally offering her the position of 5th Hokage. Tsunade accepted, though on her own terms, making it clear that she wouldn't be a puppet for the council or anyone else, that she'd make decisions based on what was best for the village rather than what was politically convenient. Her first priority was medical. The invasion had left hundreds injured, and while the village's medical ninja had been working around the clock, they were overwhelmed. Tsunade established new protocols, reorganized the hospital, and personally treated the most severe cases. She also examined Rock Lee, whose career-ending injuries had devastated him. The prognosis was grim. The damage to Lee's arm and leg was extensive. Bone fragments embedded in muscle tissue, nerves severed, the kind of injury that normally meant the end of a ninja career. Most medical ninja had told Lee he'd never fight again. But Tsunade wasn't most medical ninja. She was the best in the world, and she saw possibilities others missed. "I can operate," she told Lee. "I can't guarantee you'll return to your previous level, and the surgery is risky. There's a chance you could end up worse, but if it works, you'll be able to fight again." The surgery took 12 hours. Tsunade working with microscopic precision, repairing nerves one fiber at a time, removing bone fragments without damaging surrounding tissue. When it was over, she was exhausted, but Lee had a chance. Not a guarantee, but a real, genuine chance to recover and return to being a ninja. Lee woke up crying, not from pain, but from gratitude and relief. Might Guy, his sensei, was there too, tears streaming down his face as he thanked Tsunade over and over. This was what being a medical ninja meant, not just healing injuries, but giving people back their futures, their dreams, their reason to keep living. As Tsunade made her way through the hospital, treating injuries, organizing medical staff, pushing herself to exhaustion to help as many people as possible, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. She was making a difference. She was helping people. She was living up to the legacy of her grandfather, not by matching his combat prowess, but by using her own unique gifts to protect the village in a different way. Days later, the official inauguration ceremony was held. Tsunade stood before the assembled villagers, wearing the hokage robes and hat, looking out at thousands of faces watching her, judging her, hoping she could lead them through difficult times ahead. Some remembered her grandfather, the legendary Hashirama, who'd founded the village. Others remembered her great-uncle Tobirama or her teacher, Hiruzen. The weight of that legacy, those expectations, was enormous. But she also saw Naruto in the crowd, grinning up at her with absolute confidence, believing in her completely. She saw Jiraiya, that fool who'd loved her for decades and never given up on her, even when she'd given up on herself. She saw Shizune, who'd followed her through years of wandering and supported her through her darkest times. She saw the faces of people she'd healed in the hospital, their gratitude genuine and warming. This was her village. These were her people. And she would protect them with everything she had, the way Nawaki and Dan would have wanted, the way the third Hokage had with his final breath. People of Konoha Crush she said, and her voice carried across the assembled crowd. "I stand before you as the 5th Hokage, not because I'm the strongest ninja, not because I'm the smartest or the most qualified. I stand here because I believe in this village, in its people, in the dreams that built it, and the will that sustains it. The will of fire, passed down from the first Hokage through every generation, burns in all of us. It's the belief that we protect each other, that we sacrifice for each other, that we build a future worth living in. That fire will never go out as long as even one of us remains to carry it forward." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Tsunade felt tears threatening to form, though she blinked them back. She was home, after all these years of running, of hiding, of drowning in grief and regret. She was finally home, and she would make sure that Konoha remained a place where dreams could flourish, where children like Naruto could grow into heroes, where the sacrifices of people like Nawaki and Dan and the 3rd Hokage actually meant something.
The age of the 5th Hokage had begun, and with it, a new chapter in Konoha's story.
As the sun set over Konohagakure, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Naruto stood on the Hokage monument, looking out over the village. From up here, he could see everything: the repaired buildings, the training grounds where Genin practiced, the hospital where Tsunade worked, the memorial stone where names were carved for those who died protecting the village. He thought about everything that had happened since the Chunin Exams began. The terror of the Forest of Death and Orochimaru's mark on Sasuke. The preliminary matches where he'd defeated Neji and proven that destiny could be changed. The finals interrupted by invasion, the 3rd Hokage's sacrifice, the battle against Gaara, where he'd made his first real connection with another Jinchuriki. The journey to find Tsunade, learning the Rasengan, watching the legendary Sannin fight. So much had changed in such a short time. He'd grown stronger, learned new techniques, made new connections, but more than that, he'd begun to understand what being Hokage really meant. It wasn't just about being the strongest, though that mattered. It wasn't just about being respected, though that was nice. It was about being willing to sacrifice everything for your village, to put others before yourself, to bear the weight of everyone's hopes and dreams and fears. The 3rd Hokage had understood that. He'd given his life to weaken Orochimaru and protect the village. Tsunade understood it too. You could see it in the way she pushed herself past exhaustion every day. Even Jiraiya, that perverted fool, understood it in his own way, working as a spy network, gathering intelligence, training Naruto, despite having no obligation to do so.
That was the legacy Naruto wanted to inherit. Not just the title or the power, but the dedication, the willingness to give everything for something larger than yourself.
He clenched his fist, feeling the chakra swirl within him, the Nine Tails power mixing with his own. He'd come so far from that lonely kid who pulled pranks for attention, but he still had so far to go. Sasuke was growing stronger too, driven by his curse mark and his need for revenge. The Akatsuki was out there, hunting Jinchuriki. Orochimaru was planning something in the shadows. The world was dangerous and getting more dangerous, and Naruto needed to be ready for it. But that was okay. He'd proven he could grow, could overcome challenges, could change people's minds and hearts through his determination and his willingness to understand them. One day, he'd be Hokage. One day, he'd protect everyone in this village the way the 3rd Hokage had, the way Tsunade was doing now, the way all the Hokage throughout history had done. Until then, he'd keep training, keep growing, keep moving forward. Because that's what ninja did. They didn't give up. They didn't stop dreaming. They fought for a better tomorrow, even when today was hard, even when the odds seemed impossible. Naruto smiled, watching the sun finish setting over his village, over his home. The Forest of Death seemed like a lifetime ago now, though it had only been a few months. So much had changed. So much more would change in the days and years to come. But one thing would never change: Naruto Uzumaki's determination to become Hokage and protect everyone precious to him. That dream burned in him like the will of fire itself, unquenchable and eternal. And someday, somehow, he'd make it come true. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Naruto's most pivotal arcs, consider liking and subscribing to Sleepy Anime Stories. We'll be continuing this journey through the entire Naruto story, exploring every major event, every character development, and every world-changing moment. Until next time, stay cozy and keep exploring the worlds we love.